In a small, quiet town, there lived a schoolteacher named Maria. She was a woman in her mid-30s with a bright smile that could light up any classroom. Her eyes sparkled with warmth and kindness, and she had a passion for teaching that was evident to everyone who met her. But beneath her calm and confident exterior, Maria was battling a deep and personal struggle. Maria had been teaching for almost a decade, and she had poured her heart into her work. She loved her students, believed in their potential, and worked tirelessly to make sure they had the best education possible. But as the years passed, the weight of her responsibilities began to take its toll. She had always prided herself on being self-sufficient. She didn't like to ask for help no matter how much she needed it. To her, needing help was a sign of weakness, a vulnerability that she couldn't afford to show. At home, things were not much different. Maria lived alone in a small apartment, tucked away in a quiet corner of the town. The walls were decorated with bookshelves filled with novels, textbooks, and picture frames that captured memories of happier times. But lately, even the comfort of her home had started to feel empty. Her days were filled with lesson plans, grading papers, and trying to make ends meet on her modest salary. At night, she would sit in her favorite armchair, staring out of the window at the moonlit sky, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. The problem wasn't just her job. It was the sense of loneliness that seemed to follow her everywhere. She had friends, yes, but none that she felt close enough to share her burdens with. She had tried to date in the past, but somehow, each relationship had ended with her feeling misunderstood or unappreciated. She didn't know how to connect with people outside of her work. Her life had become a routine: work, eat, sleep, repeat. It felt like she was stuck in a never-ending cycle, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't break free. Maria's pride was both her greatest strength and her biggest weakness. She didn't want anyone to pity her or feel sorry for her. She refused to show weakness. If anyone asked her how she was doing, she would always smile and say, "I'm fine." She believed that if she didn't let anyone see how exhausted she was, they wouldn't realize how deeply she was struggling. But the truth was, she was tired, physically, emotionally, and mentally. One evening, after a particularly long day of teaching, Maria found herself sitting at her desk, staring blankly at a pile of graded papers. Her mind wandered, and she thought about how different her life could have been if she had made different choices. What if she had taken a different job, moved to a bigger city, or married someone who truly understood her? But as quickly as those thoughts came, she pushed them away. She couldn't afford to dwell on what-ifs. She had responsibilities, after all. She had students who depended on her, and that was enough to keep her going. But that evening, something was different. As she looked around her classroom, she realized that she had been living in autopilot mode for far too long. Her work, while fulfilling, had also become a way to distract herself from her deeper, more personal struggles. She had stopped dreaming, stopped believing that there was more to life than the endless cycle of teaching and grading. She felt as though she had lost touch with herself. The next day, Maria walked into school with the same bright smile she always wore, but this time, it didn't feel as genuine. She felt a sense of heaviness in her chest, something she couldn't explain. The day passed slowly. The students were as lively as always, but Maria found it harder to connect with them. She went through the motions, delivering lessons and marking homework, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about how long it had been since she had done something for herself, something that made her feel alive again. That evening, she decided to take a walk to clear her mind. The air was cool and the streets were quiet as she wandered through the town. As she passed by the park, she saw a group of children playing on the swings, laughing and shouting with joy. For a moment, she watched them, feeling a pang of longing in her heart. She remembered when she was that carefree, when her biggest worry was whether she had enough change to buy an ice cream. Life had been simpler back then. As Maria continued walking, her thoughts turned inward. She wondered if she would ever feel truly happy again. She loved her students, but was that enough to fill the emptiness she felt inside? Could she continue living like this, always putting others before herself, never allowing herself to want or need anything? The question lingered in her mind as she walked back to her apartment. When she returned, she sat down at her kitchen table and picked up her phone. There, in the silence of her apartment, she found herself scrolling through old photos on social media. She came across pictures of friends who seemed to have everything: happy families, vacations, meaningful relationships. And then there was Maria, alone. smiling in photos, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. The loneliness hit her like a wave. She felt a deep sadness settle in her chest, but this time, it wasn't something she could ignore. It was the realization that despite her outward appearance of success, she had neglected herself. She had given so much to others, her students, her friends, her family, that she had forgotten to care for her own heart. Maria put down the phone and sighed, feeling a tear escape her eye. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed by the weakness she had just shown, but deep down she knew something had to change. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. She needed to find a way to heal, to rediscover the woman she once was before life had worn her down. But where to start? As she sat there lost in thought, she heard a knock at the door. It was a simple sound, but in that moment it felt like a sign, a chance. A moment that could change everything. Maria sat at her kitchen table staring at the door where she had just heard the knock. For a moment she wondered if she had imagined it. She wasn't expecting anyone, and it was late for a visitor. Hesitant but curious, she stood up slowly and walked to the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She opened the door, and to her surprise there stood her neighbor, Mrs. Clara. Mrs. Clara was an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down. She was a retired schoolteacher and had always been kind to Maria. In fact, they had shared many conversations over the years about teaching, life, and the ups and downs of being an educator. Mrs. Clara had a warm smile and a gentle way about her, which always made Maria feel comfortable. "Good evening, dear," Mrs. Clara said, her voice soft but full of warmth. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Maria shook her head quickly, trying to hide the surprise and confusion she felt. "No, not at all. What's going on, Mrs. Clara?" Mrs. Clara hesitated for a moment, looking at Maria with a kind yet concerned expression. "I've noticed that you've been looking a bit tired lately, dear. Is everything all right? You know, I've been a teacher too, and I can tell when someone is carrying a heavy load." Maria didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to people noticing her struggles, let alone commenting on them. She had spent so long hiding her feelings, putting on a brave face, that it almost felt unnatural to be seen so clearly. But there was something in Mrs. Clara's eyes that made Maria feel like it was okay to be honest. "I've just been, I don't know," Maria started, feeling her throat tighten. "It's been a tough few months. I'm exhausted. I've been working nonstop and haven't had any time for myself. I think I'm just burning out." Mrs. Clara nodded sympathetically. "I thought as much. I can see it in your eyes, Maria. When you spend so much time taking care of others, sometimes you forget to take care of yourself. I know that feeling well, but I want you to know that you don't have to go through this alone. You've been so dedicated to your students, to your work, but now it's time to focus on you." Maria blinked, surprised by how easily the words slipped from her mouth. "I don't know how to do that. I don't even remember the last time I did something just for myself." Mrs. Clara smiled softly, her gaze full of understanding. "I know it's hard, but it's never too late to start. Taking care of yourself doesn't mean you're being selfish. It means you're honoring your own needs so you can be your best self for others. You can't pour from an empty cup, Maria." Maria felt a lump form in her throat as she realized how true those words were. She had spent so much of her life giving, without ever considering that she needed to receive something in return. She had always believed that if she worked hard enough and did everything right, the happiness and fulfillment would come. But it hadn't worked out that way. "I don't even know where to begin," Maria admitted quietly. Mrs. Clara placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a comforting touch. "Start small. Do something just for you, whether it's taking a walk, reading a book, or simply sitting quietly and reflecting. And don't be afraid to reach out when you need help. You don't have to be strong all the time, Maria. It's okay to ask for support." Maria felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had never really allowed herself to think that it was okay to ask for help, to show vulnerability. She had always prided herself on being independent, on being the one who helped others. But now, standing in her own apartment with Mrs. Clara's kind words hanging in the air, she felt the burden begin to lift just a little. "Thank you," Maria said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that." Mrs. Clara smiled warmly. "It's my pleasure, dear. You're a good person, Maria. You deserve happiness too. Don't forget that." With that, Mrs. Clara turned to leave, but before she stepped out the door, she paused. "And don't be afraid to let people in. Sometimes the right people can help you find your way when you're lost." Maria watched as Mrs. Clara walked down the hall, her footsteps light and graceful for someone of her age. The visit was brief, but the words Mrs. Clara had shared lingered in Maria's mind long after she had left. For the first time in a long while, Maria felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. That night, as Maria sat alone at her kitchen table, she began to think about what Mrs. Clara had said. She realized that for years she had been trying to carry everything on her own. She had been so focused on being the perfect teacher, the perfect colleague, and the perfect friend, that she had forgotten to be kind to herself. She had forgotten that she too was allowed to take a break, to feel tired, and to ask for help when she needed it. The next day, Maria made a decision. She would start small, just as Mrs. Clara had suggested. She would find moments for herself, even if it was just a few minutes each day. She would take time to breathe, to rest, and to do things that made her happy. And most importantly, she would start being kind to herself just as she had always been kind to others. It wasn't going to be easy. She knew that. But for the first time in a long time, Maria felt a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't have to have it all figured out right away. She didn't have to be perfect. She just had to take one small step at a time. And so Maria began her journey toward healing. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was a start toward rediscovering herself, toward finding balance in her life, and toward learning that it was okay to ask for help, to take a step back, and to give herself the care and love she had so freely given to others for so long. The days that followed Mrs. Clara's visit were some of the most reflective Maria had ever had. She took to heart what the elderly woman had told her about taking care of herself. Maria had always believed that being strong meant doing everything on her own, without asking for help. But now she was beginning to realize that true strength didn't come from being independent all the time. It came from knowing when to lean on others and when to take time for herself. For the first time in a long while, Maria decided to make small changes in her daily life. She began by waking up a little earlier each morning to enjoy a cup of tea in silence before her busy day began. She used to rush through her mornings, barely enough time to get dressed and ready for work, but now she made space for a moment of calm. It was a small change, but it felt significant. It allowed her to start the day with a clearer mind, something she had longed for but never allowed herself to have. At school, Maria found herself looking at her students differently. She had always been deeply invested in their well-being, but now she was beginning to understand that she needed to take care of herself as well. She stopped staying late into the evening to grade papers and instead set a boundary, leaving the classroom at a reasonable hour. She started taking walks in the nearby park after school, letting the fresh air clear her mind. It was a simple act, but it felt like a small victory. For the first time in years, she wasn't overwhelmed by the constant weight of her responsibilities. One afternoon, as Maria walked through the park, she came across a bench by the pond. It was a quiet spot, surrounded by trees with golden leaves falling softly in the breeze. Maria sat down, feeling the tension in her shoulders begin to melt away as she watched the ripples in the water. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, savoring the calmness she hadn't allowed herself to experience in so long. It was during these moments of peace that Maria began to reflect on her life, on the choices she had made, the dreams she had put aside, and the person she wanted to become. She realized that for too long she had buried her own desires and needs under the weight of everything else. She had told herself that her work and her students were enough to give her fulfillment. But deep down, she knew there was more to life than just teaching. She longed for deeper connections, for personal growth, and for a sense of joy that didn't have to come from perfection. One evening, as she sat in her apartment reading a book, Maria thought about the small moments of happiness she had begun to experience, like the quiet mornings, the walks in the park, and the simple act of listening to her own thoughts. She felt a warmth in her heart, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was a sense of connection to herself, to her own needs and desires. It was as though, for the first time in years, she was allowing herself to simply be. Maria knew she had a long way to go, but she also knew she was on the right path. The changes she was making in her life weren't dramatic or life-altering. They were small, but they were meaningful. She didn't need to fix everything at once. She didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to be kind to herself and allow herself to grow at her own pace. One evening, after a particularly peaceful walk, Maria ran into an old friend, Anna, who was visiting the town for a few days. Anna had been a close friend during Maria's college years, but over time their lives had drifted apart as both of them got busy with work and personal commitments. Anna had always been the more outgoing and adventurous of the two, and she had always pushed Maria to step outside her comfort zone. The two friends hadn't spoken much in recent years, but seeing Anna again was like a breath of fresh air. "Maria, wow, it's been forever," Anna exclaimed, her eyes lighting up as she recognized her old friend. "How have you been?" Maria smiled, feeling a little nervous but also excited to reconnect. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" "I've been doing all right, just busy with work, you know how it is." Anna raised an eyebrow, noticing the tiredness in Maria's eyes. "You don't look all right, though. You look like you could use a break. Come on, let's grab some coffee and catch up. You've been working so hard, I bet you haven't had time to relax in ages." Maria hesitated for a moment. It had been a long time since she had let herself take a break, and she was still getting used to the idea of putting herself first. But something about Anna's warmth and energy made Maria feel like it was okay to say yes. "All right, let's do it," Maria said with a small smile. "I could use a break." They walked to a nearby cafe and sat down, talking about old memories and catching up on life. Anna listened patiently as Maria shared some of the changes she had been making, how she had started to take more time for herself, and how it had been a struggle, but also a relief. Anna nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You know, Maria, I'm really glad you're doing this. I always knew you had it in you, but you were always so focused on everything else. It's good to see you finally focusing on yourself, even if it's just in small ways." Maria smiled, feeling a sense of pride in her friend's words. For so long she had believed that she had to give everything to others in order to feel worthy. But now she was starting to understand that taking care of herself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. It wasn't about neglecting her responsibilities or forgetting about her students. It was about finding balance and making sure that she was whole, so that she could continue to give with a full heart. As the evening went on, Maria felt more and more at peace with herself. She was learning to let go of the guilt that had kept her trapped in a cycle of self-sacrifice. She was beginning to see that it was okay to ask for help, to lean on others, and to let herself experience joy without feeling guilty about it. When the evening ended, and Anna said goodbye, Maria felt a renewed sense of energy. She had spent so much of her life doing everything on her own, thinking that she had to be perfect to be worthy of love and respect. But now she was learning that true strength didn't come from being perfect. It came from being human, from embracing imperfections and from being kind to herself. Maria walked back home, her steps light, her heart full. She wasn't there yet. She still had moments of doubt and struggle, but she was on the path to rediscovering herself. And that, she realized, was the first step toward healing. Maria woke up to a crisp, sunny morning, the kind of day that seemed to promise new beginnings. She had learned so much in the past few weeks, about herself, about what she truly needed, and about the power of small changes. But even as she began to embrace this new chapter of her life, there were still moments when doubt crept in. She sat up in bed and looked out of her bedroom window. The world outside was busy with life, the birds chirping, the leaves rustling in the wind, people going about their day. And here she was, feeling like she was still figuring out what her own day would look like. It wasn't always easy to break away from old habits, but Maria was trying, and that was what mattered. The past few days had been different. She had begun taking real breaks at work, allowing herself to step away from the classroom when needed and taking time to reflect. The school principal had noticed the change too. She had even pulled Maria aside one afternoon to ask if everything was okay. Maria was hesitant at first, unsure if she could open up about her struggles. But something inside her pushed her to be honest. "I've been feeling a little burned out," Maria admitted, her voice a bit softer than she expected. "I love teaching, but I've realized I need to find more balance in my life. I've been focusing so much on my work that I forgot to focus on myself." The principal nodded with understanding. "It's important to take care of yourself, Maria. Don't be afraid to set boundaries, to take time for yourself. You can't help others if you're running on empty. We all need a break sometimes." Maria felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't that she had expected anyone to tell her to slow down, but hearing those words from someone in a position of authority made her feel less guilty for prioritizing her well-being. It reminded her that everyone, even the most dedicated professionals, needed time to recharge. As the day went on, Maria's thoughts returned to her conversation with Mrs. Clara a few weeks ago. The elderly neighbor had told her something that stuck with her. It's okay to ask for support. Maria had never truly allowed herself to lean on others. For so long she had believed that asking for help was a weakness, but now she was beginning to see that true strength came from being vulnerable, from trusting others to be there when needed. Later that afternoon, as Maria sat in the teacher's lounge, she overheard a conversation between two of her colleagues. They were talking about a weekend retreat organized for teachers, a chance to relax, reflect, and connect with others in the same field. Maria had heard about the retreat before, but she had always brushed it off, thinking it was a luxury she couldn't afford. But now something about the idea caught her attention. A retreat could be exactly what she needed, a chance to recharge, to meet other educators who might be going through the same challenges, and to reflect on her career and life. She hesitated for a moment, but then, with a burst of courage, she decided to sign up. She had always been the type to think things through carefully before making decisions, but now she was learning to embrace the unknown, to take risks, and to trust that sometimes the best opportunities came from stepping outside of her comfort zone. That weekend, Maria packed her bags and drove to the retreat center, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew that it was time to try something different. When she arrived, she was greeted by other teachers. Some she recognized from nearby schools, others she had never met before. The group was diverse, with educators from different subjects, ages, and backgrounds, but they all shared one thing in common: a passion for teaching. The first evening at the retreat was spent getting to know each other. Maria found herself talking to a woman named Laura, a high school science teacher who had been teaching for over 20 years. Laura was warm and approachable, and as the two of them chatted, Maria felt a sense of relief. She wasn't the only one who had struggled with burnout. She wasn't the only one who had felt like her passion for teaching was slipping away. "I used to love teaching," Laura said, her eyes softening as she spoke. "But over the years I found myself feeling disconnected. I've been so focused on grading and preparing lessons that I've forgotten why I became a teacher in the first place. It's hard to keep the spark alive sometimes." Maria nodded, feeling an instant connection with Laura's words. "I feel the same way. I love my students, but I've lost sight of what's important. I've been so focused on doing everything perfectly that I forgot to care for myself. And now I'm trying to figure out how to get that spark back." As the retreat continued over the weekend, Maria began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: a sense of hope. The workshops, the quiet moments of reflection, and the conversations with other teachers opened her eyes to the fact that she wasn't alone. So many people in the education field face the same challenges: the pressure to perform, the weight of expectations, and the exhaustion that came with caring for others day in and day out. But what she also learned was that it was okay to ask for help, to take breaks, and to nurture her own well-being. She didn't have to carry the burden alone. On the last evening of the retreat, Maria sat around a campfire with the other teachers. The sky was clear and the air was crisp. As the group shared stories and laughed, Maria felt a sense of belonging that she hadn't experienced in years. She realized that by allowing herself to connect with others, whether it was through conversations with colleagues or taking time for herself, she was building a support system that would help her grow. Later, when the campfire had burned down to embers, the group shared their reflections on the weekend. Maria spoke up, her voice soft but confident. "I came here thinking that I had to have everything figured out. I thought I had to be perfect in my job, always on top of everything and never ask for help. But what I've learned is that it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to take a step back and find balance. And it's okay to be vulnerable and ask for support when you need it." Her words were met with nods of agreement, and Maria felt a sense of peace wash over her. She wasn't alone in this journey, and she didn't have to carry everything on her own. As the retreat came to an end, Maria felt a renewed sense of energy and purpose. She wasn't going to try to change everything all at once, but she had learned that taking small steps, connecting with others, and being kind to herself were the keys to finding balance in her life. She left the retreat feeling like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, a weight that had been there for far too long. When she returned home, Maria carried the lessons she had learned with her. She still had moments of doubt, but now she had the tools to handle them. She knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, But she was no longer afraid of the unknown. She was learning to embrace it one small step at a time. Maria awoke to the gentle light of morning streaming through her window. It had been a few weeks since the retreat, and in that time, her life had slowly begun to shift. The weight that had once felt so heavy on her shoulders was lighter now. Every day wasn't perfect, but she was learning to embrace the process, to take things one step at a time. She had kept the promises she made to herself during the retreat. She had made time for the small moments of peace in her day, like her morning tea, the walks through the park, and the quiet moments of reflection that allowed her to reconnect with herself. These were no longer luxuries, they were necessities. Maria had realized that in order to continue giving to others, whether it was her students, friends, or family, she first had to take care of herself. Her students had also noticed a change in her. They had always respected her as a teacher, but now there was a different kind of energy in the classroom. Maria was more present, more engaged, and more patient. She had learned to let go of the need to be perfect, and instead she focused on creating an environment where both she and her students could grow. Her lessons were still well organized and informative, but now they had more heart, more connection. One afternoon after school, Maria stayed behind to finish grading some papers. The room was quiet, and she was lost in her thoughts when she heard a soft knock on the door. She looked up to see one of her students, Ethan, standing in the doorway. Ethan was a quiet boy, often keeping to himself, and Maria hadn't expected him to come to her after class. "Ms. Maria," Ethan said hesitantly, standing just outside the door. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Maria smiled warmly and motioned for him to come in. "Of course, Ethan, what's on your mind?" Ethan stepped in and sat down at one of the desks, his hands nervously clasped together. "I've been thinking a lot about something," he began, his voice soft. I just wanted to thank you for being different. I know I'm not the best student, and I don't always do what I'm supposed to, but I've noticed that you're not like the other teachers. You don't yell at us. You actually listen to us, and you care." Maria was taken aback by his words. She had always tried to be fair and compassionate, but she hadn't realized how much of an impact it had made on him. It was humbling to hear, and for the first time in a long time, Maria felt truly appreciated, not for her perfection, but for her kindness and effort. "I'm glad to hear that." "Ethan," Maria said, her voice filled with sincerity, "I want you to know that it's okay to not be perfect. What matters most is that you try your best and that you know you're supported. If there's ever anything on your mind, I'm here to listen." Ethan's face softened, and he gave a small, genuine smile. "Thanks, Ms. Maria. I think I'm going to try harder from now on." Maria watched him leave the room, feeling a sense of warmth in her heart. It wasn't about being the best teacher or getting the highest grades. It was about making her students feel seen and heard. That was the real reward. She had learned that lesson not only in her work but in her own life. Later that evening, as Maria prepared dinner, she reflected on how far she had come. A few months ago, she would have never imagined feeling this way. She had always been so focused on others, on doing everything perfectly, that she had forgotten to live in the moment, to enjoy life for what it was. But now she was beginning to see the beauty in the small things, the laughter of her students, the quiet walks, the connection with others. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. She picked it up to find Mrs. Clara on the other end, her voice warm and familiar. "Hello, Maria. I just wanted to check in on you and see how you're doing." Maria smiled at the sound of Mrs. Clara's voice. "I'm doing well, actually. I've been making more time for myself, just like we talked about. It's been a slow process, but I feel so much better. I'm finding a balance that works for me." "I'm so glad to hear that, dear," Mrs. Clara said. "You deserve it. Remember, you can't pour from an empty cup. I know it's hard to give yourself permission to rest, but it's the best thing you can do for yourself." Maria nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude toward the woman who had guided her in such a simple yet profound way. "I've learned that, Mrs. Clara, and I'm really starting to believe it now." As they continued their conversation, Maria felt a sense of peace settle over her. She was no longer ashamed of needing time to rest, of asking for support, or of showing vulnerability. She had come to understand that being human meant having limits and imperfections. It didn't make her weak, it made her real. That weekend, Maria took another step in her journey of self-care. She attended a small gathering at the local cafe, a group of teachers who, like her, had found a way to connect outside of the classroom. The conversations flowed easily, and Maria found herself laughing and sharing stories with colleagues she had never really talked to before. It felt good to be surrounded by people who understood her struggles and who were also learning how to take care of themselves. Over time, Maria continued to grow, both as a teacher and as a person. She was no longer consumed by the idea of perfection. She learned that mistakes were a part of life and they didn't define her. What mattered was how she moved forward, how she treated herself and others, and how she learned from her experiences. One day, as Maria stood in front of her class, explaining a lesson about the importance of self-reflection, she caught sight of a few of her students quietly jotting down notes in their notebooks. They weren't just taking notes, they were reflecting. And in that moment, Maria realized that the lessons she had learned were being passed on to them, too. It wasn't just about teaching facts and figures, it was about teaching them how to live, how to be kind to themselves, and how to embrace their imperfections. Maria knew that this was the true essence of teaching, the heart of her work. It wasn't about grades or awards, it was about making a difference in someone's life, no matter how small the gesture might seem. As the school year went on, Maria continued to feel a sense of fulfillment that she hadn't known in years. She had found her balance and with it her sense of purpose. The road to healing had been long, and there were still challenges ahead, but Maria was no longer afraid. She had learned that life wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about embracing the journey, accepting the ups and downs, and always moving forward with an open heart. Maria looked around her classroom one last time before the bell rang, feeling grateful for the growth she had experienced. She wasn't the same person who had walked into the school that first day. She was stronger, more aware of her needs, and more open to the beauty of life. And with that, she knew that no matter what came next, she was ready.